I do hope that Domingo will roll up. We've been having a discussion about his favourite people, and I've had a bit more interaction with them in the past week. In fact, in the past few hours. And he doesn't like me saying that they are actually the people suffering from identity crises. And those of you who suffer from identity crises will know how deeply uncomfortable it is. You are merely suffering from your identity crisis of, well, no longer being well regarded by the rest of the world. And you think you ought to be because you represent 3 global Christian empires. I understand. It's not fun when you are told, more often than not, words to the effect of, "How are the mighty fallen?" Hello, effluent for you in Texas. Good day to you. As you know, those of you who follow me and listen attentively enough to what I say is that I tend to ignore Muslims really, and Christians, but and my fellow British people living in the UK. I know they don't matter much. Nobody cares what they think. They think, well, the political establishment think these people are low education, low information, and low status. If anybody matters at all, any nation that matters, it would be America and Israel, because America is the center of global power. Unfortunately, it is going mad, and that's why Western man is suffering. And an identity crisis of, suddenly having to come to terms with his lowered status because of all these decades of feminism. But I started to talk about Jews, and it's a law of human nature that Jews will always be blamed when things go wrong for Gentiles. It is a law of human nature. You may say it is instinctive to scapegoat anyone that we've never liked and blame them for everything. Or it could be something to do with the reason for which God made Jews as chosen people. And I've been saying quite consistently for a few years now that Jews were chosen by God to teach the Noahide laws properly, and this they have consistently refused to do. To not be too harsh on them, I can say, well, because of the history of Christian persecution, they could be forgiven for thinking it wiser not to call out the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity. And so they refuse, and there's no reason now, I suppose, that they think they would want to change the practice of 2,000 years. And so they are deeply confused. Yesterday I spoke to a Messianic Jews. He wasn't the first one I've spoken to. They are confused creatures. I mean, they do look like Jews. They have the features and skin tone of whom you would expect to be Jewish. And of course, they are hated by Orthodox Jews, because Orthodox Jews have a revulsion against idolatry. if Jews are supposed to be fit for anything, they would be the litmus paper of detecting idolatry. Unfortunately, so many Jews are so cut off from their own religious and intellectual traditions that even Jews who teach Jewish history hesitate to say that Spinoza was excommunicated for breaking the 36 laws that would attract capital punishment. So when you think of it, it's not that easy to be a Jew. I mean, just supposing God exists. What he's done for Jews is say, if you break any of these laws that would attract the death penalty for you, Jew, you're going to get it in the neck, assuming that you are living in Israel in a theocracy where these laws are indeed the laws of your society. But if you are in exile, what's going to happen? Obviously, the Gentiles who don't have these laws are not going to punish you for your idolatry and blasphemy. And this is really what the story of Pontius Pilate illustrates. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, basically washed his hands of the whole thing. Although he had the power of life and death over his Jewish subjects, he was saying, well, I'm not going to execute him because of some weird religious thing that you Jews have. So he basically placed Jesus in the pending tray, Jesus who had been convicted of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin. And then came a time for convicted criminals to be pardoned, and the option of pardoning Jesus was given to Jews, but they preferred to pardon Barabbas. That's a story anyway. So Jews in exile would not be suffering the penalty for incurring any of the 36 capital offenses as Jews living in Gentile nations. But if God exists, then what would he be doing to them? He would, of course, be imposing these punishments to Jews in the next life, assuming such a system actually existed. So let us go through what they are. I mean, 36 capital offences is quite a lot. And there are 4 methods of execution: strangulation, beheading, death by fire, death by stoning. So not particularly pleasant. So you think, well, okay, they don't live in a theocracy. This is not going to happen to them in this life. But assuming God exists, then they get it in the neck, so to speak. And of course, as the aristocracy of humanity, they would be subject to higher standards, and therefore would suffer a higher penalty for things that wouldn't even be a crime at all for Gentiles. So if they break the Sabbath, that's death by stoning. But for Gentiles, Gentiles are not supposed to even keep the Sabbath, so it wouldn't be for a crime for Gentiles at all. And as for the crimes of idolatry and blasphemy, I have said quite consistently that the Quran does not, in fact, punish idolatry and blasphemy. In fact, blasphemy is not even a concept in the Quran. Idolatry, although mentioned in the Quran, is mentioned only in reproving terms. God saying, why would you waste your time and energy worshipping an idol that can neither harm or help you? Don't be so silly. Stop it at once. And even in the Hadith, it says that Jews and Muslims praying correctly could be guilty of conceptual idolatry or hidden idolatry, meaning that while they might, to a bystander, be going through the correct forms of prayer, through their prostrations, but certainly not before an idol. But if prayer is a state of mind, then if you do all these things, if you go through the motions, but you don't think the right thoughts of, praying to God and submitting to God and asking Him for stuff and saying sorry for your sins and doing, all the prayerful things that you're supposed to do in your mind, then you're actually guilty of hidden idolatry. But there's no suggestion that such people should be punished, because I think it accepts that we could all, allow our thoughts to stray while we're doing our prayers or going through the motions of praying, and nothing can be done about this except to remind people that the correct form of prayer is to cultivate a relationship with God, which is really to have a dialogue with God in our minds. So the best example would be, I think God expects us to ask things from Him. So it would be, okay, God, can I have a new car? Can you make me successful in my romantic pursuit of whoever? And then you'd have to think, oh well, why would God grant me my wish? Perhaps I haven't been as good as I ought to be, in which case I must promise Him that I will improve my behavior. And or even if you think you deserve it, then you say, well, I deserve it because I've given to charity or helped people, or something of that nature. This idea of bargaining with God in your mind and saying to God why you ought to have this thing that you ask of Him, or recognizing that you don't deserve it at the moment, but could make yourself worthy if you do all the things that you said that you're going to promise God you're going to do. So this is the kind of relationship that we are expected to cultivate with God in our minds, Jew or Gentile. And of course, this can't be enforced, and nobody around us would be able to police our thoughts to that degree. And therefore, the Quran doesn't punish idolatry and blasphemy because it recognizes that even Jews and Muslims correctly praying could be guilty of inner, hidden, conceptual idolatry. And this, unfortunately, is what many Jews living in the West are guilty of, because conceptually they worship liberalism. Their idol, the idol of their idolatry, is liberalism. And once you understand this state of mind, you would have to acknowledge that there are even more Gentiles guilty of this conceptual idolatry. And of course, it is liberalism that is the problem. Liberalism is failing. And liberalism was created to replace Christianity, which failed centuries ago, as we will know if we are aware that Nietzsche, the German philosopher said as long ago as the 1870s that God is dead and we have killed him. He was, of course, referring to the process of the unification of united Germany after the success of the Franco-Prussian War for Germans. Because Prussia was successful, all the little German states said, yes, yes, Prussia, we will now submit to your authority, we will let you rule us, because you are powerful and a great military state, and we see the advantage of being attached to you, Prussia, and that was one of the reasons for German unification. Nothing succeeds like success, and success against the greatest Western European land power, i.e. France, was obviously, a big deal for these little German states who then agreed to become part of the German state, the German Empire. And so you can imagine that there would be teething problems of, all the, other little rules and institutions that existed before unification that would have to be, tidied up or done away or would be considered obsolete because of the unification process of the greater German state. And of course, before liberalism, the church was the first estate. So it would be the one telling the king, telling the monarch what to do, or have the appearance of doing so anyway. And think of it as you will have to think of it as a caste system, the Hindu caste system, and you know what the Hindu caste system is. You have the Brahmins, who are the priesthood, and then the warrior class. So the Brahmins would be the first estate, the priesthood. The Kshatriyas would be the warrior class, who would be the nobility in the second estate. And then you would have the Vaishyas, I think, which would be the merchant class, and that would be the third, and that would be the third estate. And the Shudras would be the labourers. So that was how society worked, and in fact, this Hindu caste system is unofficially the universal system of how most societies organise, or at least if they were thinking rationally about how to organise their society. So you would expect the priesthood to be the most learned people, and below them would be the warrior caste, the army, the military, who would be the strength. And of course, it's perfectly right that your physical strength should be governed by your reason and your intellect, and that would be represented by the priesthood. And below that would be the merchants, and below the merchants would be the labourers, whose labour merchants would require as a resource to keep their businesses going. And this is how any properly ordered society could be run on. So as long as monarchy existed, and of course, this is actually a primitive form of government. which is now being comprehensively defenestrated both in the East and the West, because the American, French, and Russian revolutions represented a rejection of monarchy in the West, and of course the fall of the Qing dynasty in China also represented a rejection of monarchy in the East. So what have Jews got to do with it? They are, I have said, the aristocracy of humanity, and they are subject to higher standards and more severe punishments for breaking the rules that we Gentiles would not even be punished for. But that's because they are the ones who are supposed to impose standards, and it seems that over the centuries they have forgotten what the hell they were supposed to do and what the hell they were chosen by God to do. I've even met a rabbi who said, "Oh, Jews are just ordinary people. We're just people like you," which I thought was shocking. But then there are so many shocking things I hear these days from Jews and Gentiles who don't seem to know who they are. And if we don't know who we are, then there's going to be a lot of problems doing things that we ought to do, particularly when we don't even know, apparently, whether we are male or female or Jew or Gentile. And if we lose our identity in that way, then it could easily be said that we are, in fact, suffering from amnesia and dementia, and obviously governments operating under conditions of amnesia and dementia would destroy themselves and their societies and civilizations and the people within it. So on the question of Messianic Jews, we can see that it is an unnatural thing that only came about after so many centuries of assimilation. So basically, Jews have gone native. They think they're Gentiles, and they think it's all right to be Gentiles. But actually, if you take seriously the narrative of the Abrahamic God, whose people these Jews are meant to be, his chosen people, then we have to ask ourselves what he chose them for. And my thesis is that he chose them to uphold standards and to set standards, and this they are clearly no longer capable of doing because they've forgotten themselves. And Messianic Jews are basically Jews who consciously, deliberately decided to become idolaters and blasphemers by becoming Christians, and who use their status as Jews to persuade Gentiles to become Christians in the expectation of triggering the second coming, because that is the narrative of Christianity. As we know, Jews and Muslims reject Jesus as the Messiah. Now, are we to just say it's okay, we'll never know what is true, and we should live and let live and agree and allow all these different religious groups to have their different religious opinions? But those who care about such things should consider that God, if he exists, would have a view on whether Christianity is idolatry and blasphemy. He would have a view, wouldn't he, if he exists? And we can deduce that if Christians are guilty of idolatry and blasphemy, then there'll be trouble for them. And we know he did forbid idolatry and blasphemy because he said so in his 10 Commandments, and it's in the Torah. So there is ample written evidence that God, if he exists and did indeed reveal the Torah, has forbidden idolatry and blasphemy. Now, is there a way in our lives to work out which is more likely to be correct? Which of the 3 Abrahamic faiths is more likely to be correct? I think there is. I mean, that is really my whole thesis. So it seems obvious to me that, if Christians have, basically been making a thing about worshipping a Jew, then it's obvious that their whole religion depends on the existence of Jews. So without the Torah, there would be no Jews. Without Jews, these Christians would have no Jesus to worship, and their religion would just not ever have come up. And without this terrible era of Christianity, there would be no Islam to correct it. But anyway, we know that if God exists, he revealed the Torah first to Jews and the Quran for Gentiles. Making the scripture of Christianity, the New Testament, obviously inferior, because the Christians, well, they cooked up their religion, never once thought to claim that their scripture, came from God. It's like, oh, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're not even Jesus. Jesus didn't even write anything. And then later, when the doctrine of the Trinity was cooked up, because Constantine wanted a new religion, because his Roman religion was failing. So historically, it's easy to prove that the doctrine of the Trinity was cooked up by a bunch of bishops called to a council by an emperor who wasn't even Christian. And the outcome of it at Nicaea was that they couldn't even agree, because there was a split between these bishops, with the majority of them going for the Trinity, i.e. that Jesus is co-equal to the Abrahamic God who created the universe, and the Arians who said, well, Jesus is a bit like the offspring of Zeus when he mated with mortal women. So Jesus was kind of semi-divine. So this has never been resolved, and this schism exists to this day, and it's Jehovah's Witnesses who are the Arians of modernity. So Christianity has a lot of problems, and it should be obvious now that it makes the highest claim, but has the most inferior scripture. So I'm saying, it should be obvious by now what we have to do if we did believe in God, if our governments believed in God, if we had any theologians or priests or scholars fit for the purpose of discussing these things, instead of just leaving it to me to talk about it. So we've eliminated Christianity, assuming you agree with my line of reasoning. So, it's a toss-up between Judaism and Islam. And I think you would agree with me that the rational person, whether he be Jewish or Gentile, would say, well, if we have a chance, if we really have the option of getting to heaven, if we follow these rules in our lives correctly, we would choose the rules that are least restrictive and least harsh in punishment, i.e., the one that doesn't have 36 capital punishments for breaking the Sabbath and inciting a community to practice idolatry. That's also a capital offense, you know. So we wonder how many times um, the heretic Paul would have, how many death penalties he would have clocked up. So let's see. Let us to the Corinthians, Romans, the Ephesians. Is there something else I've missed out? Let's just say that for every letter to the Ephesians, the Romans, Galatians, Colossians, Thessalonians, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he would have clocked up 5 death penalties in one lifetime, minimum. So I'll give you an idea of what would incur the death penalty. So this is just death for stoning, intercourse between a man and his mother, intercourse between a man and his father's wife, not necessarily his mother, intercourse between a man and his daughter-in-law, intercourse with another man's wife from the first stage of marriage, intercourse between two men, bestiality, cursing the name of God in God's name, idol worship, giving one's progeny to Moloch. I wonder if it could be argued to be abortion, perhaps, necromancy, sorcery, Pythonic sorcery. I don't quite know what. Well, that's snake worship. Necromancy is a practice of magic or black magic involving communication with the dead, either by summoning their spirits as apparitions, visions, or raising them bodily for the purpose of divination, imparting the means to foretell future events, discover hidden knowledge, to bring someone back from the dead, or to use the dead as a weapon. Ooh, zombies. Okay, so that would incur the death penalty. Voodoo witch doctors. The Chthonic sorcery is devotion to serpent deities. The tradition is present in several ancient cultures, particularly in religion and mythology, where snakes were seen as holders of knowledge, strength, and renewal. Okay, so death. If you do that, attempting to convince another to worship idols. So attempting is already a capital offense, attracting the penalty of stoning, instigating a community to worship idols, actually succeeding. And of course, Paul succeeded in instigating a community, the communities in Rome, Corinth, Galatia, Ephesus, Philippi, Colossians. Well, where is that? Colossus, I guess. Where? So it's a place where is Colossus? I guess I'm saying it. Colossae in Asia Minor. Then witchcraft, violating the Sabbath, cursing one's own parent, being a stubborn and rebellious son. So that's if you're a Jew, you could easily clock up quite a few death penalties within one lifetime. So I'll read you more capital offences. This one is death by burning. The daughter of a priest who completed the second stage of marriage commits adultery. I don't know what that means. Intercourse between a man and his daughter, intercourse between a man and his daughter's daughter, intercourse between a man and his son's daughter, intercourse between a man and his wife's daughter, not necessarily his own daughter, intercourse between a man and his wife's daughter's daughter, intercourse between a man and his wife's son's daughter, intercourse between a man and his mother-in-law, intercourse between a man and his mother-in-law's mother, intercourse between a man and his father-in-law's mother, and then beheading, unlawful premeditated murder, being a citizen of a city that has gone astray. So if you live in any country that practices idolatry, like India, I guess, you would have incurred a death penalty. And finally, death by strangulation, committing adultery with another man's wife when it does not fall under the above criteria, wounding one's own parent, kidnapping another Israelite, prophesying falsely, prophesying in the name of other deities, a sage who is guilty of insubordination in front of the grand court in the chamber of the hewn stone. So there you are. I've been informed that Fred Loiter is on Ryan Dawson's stream, but I'll just finish saying what I'm saying because I'm not going to break off. So where was I? So yeah, I'm saying that Jews have it quite hard. All these terrible penalties for what we consider as little things, and it would never occur to us to think of those little for rude and rebellious son, death, breaking the Sabbath, death. So they have a far higher standard. And of course, if they break these rules, then they get punished more. And if they don't get punished in this life, presumably they will be punished in the next life. And you can imagine, if you have a whole bunch of crimes that you have that are as yet undischarged, you would have to basically be, stoned to death and then to be resurrected and then burned to death and then resurrected and then beheaded and then resurrected and to be strangled and, until, assuming you've committed 36 of them, I suppose it's possible if you're really actively offending, then you'd have to. Yeah, and of course you can, do it more than once, which means it would be even more than 36 deaths that you could suffer in the afterlife in the methods that I have just described: stoning, burning, beheading, and strangulation. So it's, assuming that this actually happens, then they do have quite a burden, and arguably, because they have such a burden, we could give them a little bit of respect, right? And okay, and then if if they're not up to the burden of, upholding standards, and they're saying, no, this is terrible, we don't want to do that, can we be no-hides? Because one part of their thing is that Jews have to obey the 10 Commandments, and well, Gentiles only have to obey 7, and this means that Gentiles have a lower standard. But it doesn't appear that even in Israel, Jews are adhering even to the minimum moral standards expected of mere Gentiles. And now they don't want to talk about it. And so I think things are quite bad morally, because the Jews have basically lost their identity. They don't even know what they're supposed to do, and they're doing all the wrong things, and then they can't be corrected because they basically don't believe anymore. And those of them who pretend to be Jews are basically pretending because they think that being Jewish is a great thing, particularly if they don't have to fulfill any of the responsibilities, the burdens, the obligations. So, it'd be great to enjoy all the privileges without having to suffer the burdens and restrictions of being God's chosen people. And what does this mean? It means that they're all, in fact, atheists who don't care. Because they don't care because they don't believe God exists, and they certainly don't believe that there will be an afterlife in which God will be punishing them by sending them to hell or heaven. So this is something to consider about, all these rabbis. It's like you look at them and the way they do whatever they do. Do they really even believe in God? We know Christians don't, because quite a lot of them don't even know what Christians are supposed to believe in, and those who pretend to be Christian are really using Christianity as a cloak to protect them from their, when they want to say anti-Semitic things like synagogue of Satan, and obviously to annoy Muslims who are supposed to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son. So it's a great burden to be Jewish, and Messianic Jews would be using their status as Jews to entice Gentiles into becoming idolaters and blasphemers. And this, I think, will attract a death penalty or two, depending on how many Gentiles that they've enticed into the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity. So the phenomenon of Messianic Jews would be to demonstrate how far astray Jews now are from their religious and intellectual traditions. And we may say it doesn't matter if we're atheists, I suppose, but if God exists, then he would be considering the kind of punishment that would be appropriate for Jews who actually instigate a community, or many communities in the world, to worship idols. So that's the end of my talk. I'll read the chat now. So I'm basically saying Jews are in trouble, really, because they just won't be corrected. In fact, they're going the other way, because yesterday I met a Messianic Jew who, interestingly enough, he said, well, he comes from a very strange background. So basically he said that when he was a child, he went to the United Methodist Church. And then his pastor told him to go to the synagogue, and then later he became a pastor who was also a Southern Baptist. And then he became a Messianic Jew. And you just think, this is really messed up, isn't it? You almost feel sorry for the guy. But anyway, that's what he told me. And oh yes, I met him on Discord. I'm a lot on Discord these days. So you get these, very confused Jews who don't know who they are, and they cause more confusion in Gentiles, obviously, because they don't know who they are. And if God chose them for a particular reason, then it's important that they should stay sane and, in touch with their Jewish identity. And many of them really don't know who the hell they are, and therefore they don't know what the hell they're supposed to do. And then they do the opposite thing, like becoming a Messianic Jew to encourage, vulnerable Gentiles to become Christian, which means, creating more idolaters and blasphemers offensive to God. So Christine Ramsey is showing signs of dementia because she now doubts my existence. And she blasphemes by saying that God is a psychopath. And she's a Catholic. And so I really think, Catholics are, well, suffering also from an identity crisis, because nothing that Christine says bear any resemblance to Catholicism other than Jesus loves you and, that sort of thing. So she has no moral principles, and if she has any principle at all, it is to hate Jews and Muslims and basically say I have no right to tell her anything, and even though she's clearly far astray. Okay, I see that Conops wants to come on. So I'll post the link in Hangouts because I really, really don't want to talk. I don't want weird people coming on. I don't know why Christine Ramsey is talking about the Chinese. Although it would be an interesting exercise to rank the laws of China with using the no-hide laws in comparison to the laws of the West. And I think the laws of China would be more no-hide than the laws of Western nations. Of course, I'm not proposing killing anyone. I'm just saying God, if he exists, would be dealing with Messianic Jews in a way that was listed in the 36 capital punishments that I have already read to you. I'm just speculating, of course. How would I know how God would punish Jews in the afterlife. Well, I know sorcery is real. Well, there are people who practice it and there are people who believe in it. So I guess you could say that in this way, sorcery is still being practiced. What about the Green Man? Alan Bastard. Perhaps one of these days I might visit Colossae. Which character in Life of Brian do you think I resemble, Christine Ramsey? Is Damascus really the oldest city in the world? Are you sure? Okay, I've posted the link, the StreamYard link to Connaughts, but he's not coming on. So I guess I'll finish my stream if nobody will come on, and then maybe catch up on the Ryan Dawson one where Fred Leuchter is talking. That's what I should do, really, isn't it? Okay, I'll do that. Thank you all for coming, and talk to you soon.